December 2nd, 1805. The French army is trapped. Napoleon is outnumbered, outgunned, and pinned against a frozen plateau. The emperors of Russia and Austria are watching from the heights, laughing, because they think the little corporal has finally run out of luck. They thought he was scared. They thought he was retreating. But that's the thing about Napoleon. If he looks like he's losing, you're already dead. In the next 6 hours, he won't just win a battle. He will perform a deletion of an entire world order. This is the story of the outsider who turned math into a weapon of mass destruction. Before the crown, there was the classroom and the bullying. Born on the rugged island of Corsica, Napoleon was actually an anti-French revolutionary as a kid. He hated the country he would eventually rule. When his father sent him to a prestigious military school in France at age 9, he was an alien. He didn't speak the language well, he was broke, and his classmates, all wealthy aristocrats, mocked his peasant accent. So Napoleon did the only thing a lonely, angry genius could do. He went to war with his library. While the other cadets were practicing their ballroom dancing, Napoleon was devouring the tactics of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. He wasn't just reading history, he was looking for a way to break it. He became a master of logistics and ballistics. He realized that the future of power wasn't in noble blood, it was in the math of a 12-pound cannonball. He was the original grind set nerd, obsessed with the physics of impact, while everyone else was focused on their lace collars. Then, the French Revolution exploded. The king was executed, and the old rules of the military died with him. In the chaos of 1795, a desperate government gave the 26-year-old outsider a chance to save them from a massive royalist mob. This was his beta test. While the politicians argued about liberty, Napoleon was out in the streets with his cannons. He didn't see a crowd, he saw a math problem. One whiff of grape shot later, the mob was gone, and the little nerd from Corsica was the most powerful man in Paris. Most 18th century generals treated war like a polite game of chess. They moved slow, slept in palaces, and followed the rules. Then came Napoleon. And he didn't just play the game, he flipped the board, set the table on fire, and rewrote the laws of physics. Imagine you're an Austrian general. You've got more men, better guns, and a 500-year-old family legacy. You go to sleep thinking the French are 2 days away. You wake up, and their bayonets are already at your throat. In 1796, the French government gave Napoleon a promotion that was actually a death sentence. They sent him to lead the Army of Italy, a force so broke they didn't have shoes, enough bread, or even a reason to fight. The generals in Paris expected him to fail. This army was basically a disaster. But Napoleon didn't ask for more money. He gave them a speech that essentially said, "There's food and glory in Italy. Follow me and we'll just go take it." He didn't just lead them, he re-engineered how they moved. He perfected the core system, independent mini-armies that could move on different roads and feed themselves off the land. It was the 1800s version of lag-free warfare. One corps would bait the enemy into a fight, another would spawn behind them on a side road, and by the time the enemy general finished his morning coffee, Napoleon was already in his kitchen. In just 1 year, he deleted 4 Austrian armies. But Napoleon was fighting 2 wars, one on the battlefield and one for his image. He started his own newspapers, printing stories of his divine genius to send back to Paris. He realized that speed equals mass. If you hit a slow enemy twice as fast, it's like hitting them with twice the soldiers. But he also realized that gold equals power. He didn't just conquer Italy, he systematically looted it. He sent wagons of Renaissance art and millions in gold back to the broke government in Paris. Every victory was a career move. By funding the French treasury with Italian gold, he made himself indispensable. The politicians couldn't fire him,
because he was the only one paying their bills. He wasn't just a general, he was a software update for the human brain. He didn't just steal Italy's heart, he used it to buy his own future. By the time he returned to France, he wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a celebrity with his own private bank account and a veteran army that was loyal only to him. And celebrities don't take orders, they take the throne.
December 1805. The son of Austerlitz is about to rise on what historians call the greatest tactical masterpiece in the history of warfare. Napoleon isn't just fighting an army. He's fighting two emperors at once, Alexander of Russia and Francis of Austria. On paper, Napoleon is cooked. He's outnumbered, his supply lines are stretched thin, and his enemies hold the high ground, the Pratzen Heights. If you're a normal general, you see this and you retreat. But Napoleon, he sees this and thinks, how can I make them feel so confident that they make a mistake? He begins the ultimate bait. He intentionally weakens his right flank, leaving it wide open. He even orders his troops to act disorganized, tricking the Russian scouts into thinking the French are panicked and ready to flee. This is the bait and switch. He knew the Russian Emperor Alexander was young, arrogant, and desperate for glory. Napoleon practically gift-wrapped his right wing and whispered, "Come and get it." The trap worked. The Allies abandoned the Pratzen Heights, the literal key to the battlefield, and rushed down to crush the weak French right. They thought they were winning. They thought the battle was over. But as they descended into the valley, a thick, legendary fog swallowed the landscape. While the Allies were celebrating, 17,000 French troops under Marshal Soult were hidden in the valley, literally standing in the fog waiting for the signal. They were the Ghost Division. Then the sun broke through. Napoleon gave the order. From the mist, 17,000 bayonets emerged, sprinting directly up the Pratzen Heights that the Allies had just left empty. In one move, Napoleon had occupied the high ground and cut the enemy army in half. It wasn't a battle. It was a 13-minute logic puzzle solved with gunpowder. By the time the Allied emperors realized what had happened, their center was gone, their flanks were surrounded, and their men were fleeing across frozen ponds, only for Napoleon's artillery to blast the ice right from under their feet. Austerlitz didn't just end a war. It deleted the 1,000-year-old Holy Roman Empire. Napoleon had reached his peak. He was no longer just a general. He was the sun around which all of Europe revolved. Every empire has a breaking point, and for Napoleon, it was a map that was simply too big. By 1812, he controlled almost all of Europe, but he wanted more. He wanted Russia. He assembled the Grande Armée, the largest invasion force in human history. Over 600,000 men, an unstoppable tide of iron and muscle marching toward Moscow. This is where the math nerd finally got his variables wrong. Napoleon was used to high-speed battles that ended in a week. He thought he could just march in, delete the Russian army, and be home for dinner. But the Russians knew they couldn't beat the system in a fair fight. So, they didn't fight. They retreated, and as they left, they burned everything. Every field of wheat, every barn, every village turned to ash. It was scorched earth tactics. Napoleon's army was built to live off the land, but there was no land left to live on. He was chasing a ghost into a furnace. Napoleon eventually reached Moscow, but it was a hollow victory. The city was deserted, and within hours it was engulfed in flames set by Russian saboteurs. He waited 5 weeks for a surrender that never came. And then, the first snowflake fell. This wasn't just a cold front. This was the general winter. The temperature dropped to minus 30 degrees. The horses died first, then the men. The unstoppable army was now a 500-mile-long funeral procession. Out of the 600,000 men who marched in, Barely 20,000 made it back to the French border. Napoleon hadn't been outsmarted by a general. He had been swallowed by the landscape. The myth of his invincibility was dead, and across Europe, the kings he had bullied for a decade began to sharpen their blades. The system didn't just crash. It was buried in the snow. But Napoleon wasn't done playing. He was exiled to a tiny island called Elba, only to escape, march back to Paris, and convince an entire nation to go all in one last time. He basically respawned for a final boss fight. But the world had finally caught up to his software. It all came down to a rainy field in Belgium, Waterloo. For the first time, his enemies didn't panic. They used his own tactics against him, holding their ground until the Great Deletion was final. Napoleon was sent to a rock in the middle of the Atlantic, where he died at 51, not as a god, but as a prisoner of the very world he tried to rewrite. He proved that a nerd with a plan can topple 1,000 years of tradition. But he also proved that if you don't know when to walk away from the table, the house eventually wins. So, if you had a brain that could outcalculate an entire continent, would you know when to stop? Or would you march until the ice took everything? Let us know your strategy in the comments. Don't wait for the winter to join the order. Hit subscribe to see who's getting deleted from history next.